Moot, great to be in your neck of the woods, and we're going to start off this morning with some words from Mr. Ken King, our phenomenal district engineer here. Sir, thank you for hosting us and taking care of us, and so far so good, so don't mess it up yet. Now, you're on a good roll.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and members of the board. Certainly, I welcome you to Roanoke, welcome you to the Salem District. Salem, as you may know, is 12th County District. To the west, Interstate 77, in Carroll County. We stop short of Wythe County, but then include Pulaski and Giles as you go up to the West Virginia line. To our east, Botetourt, so coming down Botetourt, and also Bedford, so the forest area, which feels like Lynchburg, as you know, but we stop short of Lynchburg in that area, and then down to Martinsville, but stop short of Danville. So that's kind of our swath, but we've got such great communities that it's my pleasure to serve. I want to, on behalf of all of those communities, thank you for the support that you've provided as a board. We have so many exciting projects going on right now. It's a great time to be in transportation. Sort of most notable among those is our improvements on Interstate 81. We have a number of projects that are progressing quite well, and we're pleased with the support that's been provided. Also improvements to 58, and then numerous other projects around the district that have such an impact on the communities that we serve in terms of the quality of life and safety. It couldn't happen without your help. It also couldn't happen without the partnerships that we have with our localities. We have some great staff that are both extremely cooperative and professional, and I know that's true across the Commonwealth, and certainly they represent a very large part of our program. As the days follow, we're going to be doing the statewide local programs workshop. I hope many of you will have an opportunity to participate in some of that and see the exciting things going on with all of our localities. I know this afternoon as well, you'll be on a tour, some of you, to the Amtrak Future Rail Station up in the Cambria Street area, and then on to Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, which is now the largest transportation research institute in the nation. If you've been there before, I think you'll get some exciting updates about the things that are going on to make our infrastructure durable as well as smarter, and certainly the vehicles that match that. Autonomous driving, connected autonomous vehicles, the research that goes on there is impressive. I've been there many times, but I think every time I go, I find something new that I'm impressed with in terms of the way that they are researching and leading forward with innovation, which brings such promise for safety in the improvement of our quality of life. I will say that I'm afraid you're going to have to endure some rain, so I apologize for that. But like so much of the Commonwealth, we've been quite dry, and so we must celebrate this rain that we're getting. But other than the rain, if there's anything that I or others here in my local district can do to make your visit enjoyable, don't hesitate to let the commissioner and I know, and we will meet your need. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here.
King, thank you so much, and appreciate everything y'all have done to make this a great visit for us. And thanks for kicking us off well, and we'll roll right into the next favorite thing I get to do, which is to lead the group in the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll join with me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As I look around this room and see all these folks gathered here and all this stuff here, it just reminds me that a lot of people do a lot of work for us to get on the road and go places. And you just look at the stuff that's around in the room, the electronics and all the rest of the stuff has got to be brought in, set up, taken down, taken home. So I just want to thank the folks that travel as part of the staff, Carol, and everyone else. All our staff here that does all this work is really appreciated, and it's great to be out here. We recognize that it's harder to go on the road, but it's important for us to do that, and so we appreciate it. The first item on our written agenda this morning is the Virginia Byways program, Mr. Russ Dudley. Good morning, sir. Great to see you.
Members of the board, nice to be here. Thank you all for making it. Get settled. most importantly, these things. So today I have a scenic byways designation to provide to you. The request comes from Frederick County. So I'll go over that request, but I will also provide a summary of the program. We don't get too many of these, and you don't see too many of these, so I think that's pretty important. The Byways designation program is authorized in the Code of Virginia. It authorizes this board to designate scenic byways in Virginia. And if you're not familiar with scenic byways, those blue signs with the cardinal on them that you'll see across the state. And we do so in coordination with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. That generally involves a recommendation or deferral from DCR to the department and the board, which we do have. The Local Assistance Division does manage this program, and we work very closely with DCR using an MOA which designates the process and the respective responsibilities. We are asked on occasion what are the merits of a designation, and generally the designation is used by local governments to showcase unique attributes in the area of the designation, and it can help attract tourism to the county. The designation does not affect land use or road improvements, but it does limit by state law off-site outdoor advertising when the route is part of the national highway system. So those are our principal arterials and most of our primary routes, and that is the case for this request. The process generally begins with requests from the affected localities, and sometimes it's more than one locality, with a resolution from those counties, and staff from both DCR and Local Assistance Division evaluate the corridor. Generally, they take a ride down the corridor and using a checklist. They evaluate the corridor before they provide any recommendations to me or to bring to the board. When evaluating the corridor, staff looks to see if the corridor provides access to scenic, historic, cultural, or natural sites for the traveling public, and if the corridor connects other scenic roads to those sites. These requirements are all outlined in our MOA. If there's a public request, or if DCR or our staff feels that there are public concerns about the designation, we will request a public hearing and that will be held. That was not the case for this designation. We do have more than 3,600 miles of scenic byways designated in the state, and you can find those routes either in hard copy with a map that we publish or online at this site. This is the proposed map of the location. As you see, it is in the very southwest corner of Frederick County, adjacent to West Virginia. The yellow on this map is the proposed corridor, and the green is an existing byway. So this proposed designation actually extends an existing byway. This is the timetable for this designation. It actually started with an inquiry from a public citizen. The public citizen was directed to go to their board in the county. The county supported the request, and I'm here before you today to summarize the request, and you will vote on this next month. So some points of interest. This is on Route 55 in Frederick County. The points of interest along the route. The Tuscarora Trail, and that picture that you see here is taken from the Tuscarora Trail. Duck Run, Cedar Creek, there's a natural spring. Simply Shenandoah Wellness and Nature Retreat in Devil's Backbone State Forest. It also provides access to George Washington National Forest. I took a ride on this weekend virtually. It's a beautiful, beautiful route. The route does extend the existing designation of Route 55 through the entirety of Frederick County to the West Virginia line. It connects Route 604, like I said, is a designated Virginia byway, and will add 4.38 miles to the byway inventory, bringing the total byway mileage within Virginia to 3,608.7 miles. As far as the next steps, we will bring this action to the board next month, and you will vote on it. If designated, the VDOT will install the Virginia byway signs, and we will update the maps. That's it. Any questions?
Mr. Dudley, does basically, if you go to your slide 3, basically what this does is limit the signage along the highway. It promotes the highway, it does other things. But in terms of restrictions, it's really about the view corridor.
Yes,
And
sir.
it's really about just keeping unnecessary things out of that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It only prohibits the outdoor advertising off-site. So if it's an on-site sign, you're fine. I virtually drove
Well,
this.
yeah,
There's
that's
not
what
much
you-
there.
I think you said, I was gonna ask Deputy Commissioner McGee, what does it mean when you ran it virtually? Is that what I do versus what you do? Is that what Russ and I do? We ran the route virtually?
I had a little man that was doing that.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was the same thing that you did when you run those routes. I don't think it's the same, is it? No, ma'am, okay, thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Gasper.
Russ, the sign limitations, does that apply to the, I guess, state-sponsored directional signs?
Directional signs are exempt.
I'm sorry?
Directional signs are exempt. It's just outdoor advertising signs. So any MUTCD signs or directional signs, things like that.
On those as well.
We put up the directional signs that we need to put up, right? And no more and no less. Anybody else? Yes, sir, Mr. Folks.
Well, I'm curious, it goes to the West Virginia state line. Does West Virginia have anything like this?
So, Mr. Secretary, they do have a scenic byways program. This does not connect to a scenic byways in West Virginia.
But maybe they'll get the hint.
Then maybe they will. We'll give them the kickstart.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dudley. I want to take a pause here for a minute to introduce some new members, or let them introduce themselves a little bit. So we have 3 new members on our board. Unfortunately, one is experiencing small health issues, so he's not here. Mr. Gribben is not here today. But our other 2 members are with us for their first meeting. So I'm going to take a short pause, Ms. Dunlop, and ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you. And this is Ms. Becky Norton Dunlap, and we're excited to have her as a member of our board.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. Thanks for that great presentation. My name is Becky Norton Dunlop, and I live in Wythe County, named after the great George Wythe, who never visited Wythe County, but we love the name. I live in a very rural part of the county. All of Wythe County is pretty rural, but I live 3 miles down a state-maintained, non-hard, what's the
Gravel
word I
road.
want to use? A gravel road. And I lived in Arlington for 40 years and worked in the D.C. area and traveled all throughout Virginia. But my husband and I decided to retire in Wythe County. It's a delight to be there. I love the rural parts of Virginia because I know they bring so much to the ideas that people have about our great Commonwealth. We have great cities, we have seashores, we have mountains, we have rural areas. And I'm excited to be an advocate for rural Virginia because I think it's an important part of our Commonwealth's fabric. And I've served in federal and state government, but also in the private sector, and appreciate what the transportation system of the Commonwealth does, not only for people who want to go through our Commonwealth for economic purposes, but for the people who live and work here and raise their families. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunlop. We're excited to have you be with us, and it's a great group, as you are starting to find out, of really dedicated folks who want to make a difference and like to have fun while they're doing it. And now I'll ask Mr. John Good to tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm from Frederick County, Virginia, and I come from an agricultural background. I still live on the family farm, although we lease it to another local farmer. Graduate of Virginia Tech in 1976. I mentioned to Mr. Smoot that I had 2 credit hours of agricultural engineering, so I feel very qualified to be here and help with VDOT stuff. I'm a certified public accountant, and I have worked for a construction company and real estate company for 45 years. And we made some concrete parts for data centers and things like that, which are a pretty big deal now. And we also sold some ready mix to VDOT over the years. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to working with everybody.
Well, welcome. We're excited to have you as well. And I think you'll find it fulfilling. It's plenty of work. There's plenty to dig into here. And you'll find that you've got some great colleagues that will be helpful to you and enjoyable to be around as we go through our journey together. Mr. Dudley?
Sure.
You got another one.
Yes, I do. So today, the next presentation I have is an overview of an economic development access application for a standard or non-bonded project allocation request from Russell County. This is for access to a new commercial development, Pure Salmon, Virginia. As a quick reminder, some new information for our new board members. This slide provides some of the highlights of the Economic Development Road Access Program. Simply, it provides funding to construct new roads or upgrade existing roads that serve new or expanding economic development sites. These are industrial sites, economic development sites. Funding is provided directly to local governments, and local governments will submit applications for that funding. Projects can be known businesses, as such as this case, or they can be speculative. When it is speculative, we call it a bonded project, and the locality must provide a bond or some sort of financial surety to cover the amount of allocations that we provide them. They have to provide a certain amount of capital investment in a certain amount of time, or we call those funds back. We work very closely with VEDP, Virginia Economic Development Partnership, when evaluating these applications to ensure the attractive businesses meet the minimum requirements of the program. These programs is outlined in code, so we have some very specific requirements to meet in code. And this is what we can provide. The maximum allocation that we will provide for a project is $850,000. $700,000 of that is unmatched, but the next $150,000 has to be matched dollar for dollar by the local government. This particular request is for, as I mentioned, Pure Salmon of Virginia, and the request is for the construction of a new access road in Russell County. You see the campus, I'll just show you here in a second. The campus extends over Russell County into Tazewell campus. The site is located off US Route 19, right on the border of the two counties, adjacent to Southwest Virginia Community College. As you might suspect, Pure Salmon is a salmon farming and processing facility of Atlantic salmon. The company plans to employ over 200 workers within 9 buildings on their campus and produce 10 million tons of salmon annually. Pure Salmon will invest more than $190 million of capital investment into their campus, and they expect to begin hiring in 2027 with full operations in 2028. Proposed access project will construct a new right turn lane off Route 19 and a new 0.4 of a mile long, 26-foot wide access road to the facility. The total estimated cost of the project is just over $1 million, and the county has requested the maximum allocation of $850,000. Here's your illustration of the conceptual drawing. You see where it goes right to the facility and the campus. You see the earthwork is right over both counties. This is our score sheet for non-bonded projects. We do have another score sheet for bonded projects. We score for expected or actual capital investment. We've already received $29 million of capital investment documentation from the county. We score for expected or potential full-time job creation. Of course, here they're expecting over 200. We score for the need for the access road. There is no road here, so the road is needed for the new facility. And we look at the distress level of the locality according to VEDP's Commonwealth Opportunity Funds definition. And this is a double distress locality for both unemployment and poverty. This project hit all the marks and scored 100 out of 100. So as far as next steps, next month we will bring a resolution to you to allocate the funds. Should you approve the allocation, we will enter into a project state aid agreement with the locality, and the locality will administer the project with oversight from the department. Questions?
Mr. Stanton?
Salmon's a saltwater fish. Would you tell me how they get salt water to Russell County?
I've read a little bit about the facility. It is an amazing engineering feat out. It is just not only what they're doing, but the construction of it. Apparently, it's so heavy, the facility with all the water and everything. They have to go into it ahead of time and use like this special high density concrete to actually compact the soil for 18 months before they can even start building the building there, and they dig all that up. It's just amazing what they can do. I can't tell you the details of how the whole aquaculture works. It's just crazy for me when I think about it.
$200 million
surcharge.
worth of salt water, that's how they do it.
Yeah.
I'd like to see how they get it there.
They make it. Anybody else? You know, it's interesting, when I first saw this, 200 jobs, $190 million investment in Russell County. That's profound. And what's going to happen there, I mean, it is really, really neat. It's a really neat project. And it's just great to be able to help them out a little bit with this road work. What else? So we should work a deal, right, and get some salmon to the next board meeting, right? Whenever they get in business, I think I'll be gone, but we'll have some pure salmon. It's very exciting. So thank you, Russ. No other questions. All right, thank you very much. Russ, you're just hanging on.
Just gonna
here
keep
for dear
right on
life,
going.
aren't
You guys haven't had enough of me.
Want to pull up a chair, Russ?
I put my couch and a recliner.
Let's talk about the performance of our locally sustained program.
Yes, sir. So in October of last year, the board adopted their performance policy for locally administered projects. That policy requires an annual update of our program, known as a Locality Sustained Performance Program, and this is that annual update. So this is our first annual update.
So, Russ, let's back up a little bit and just talk about a locally administered project versus a VDOT project, and just give us a little bit of flavor around that, particularly for our new folks.
So localities may administer VDOT-funded projects or projects that are in the SYIP, our 6-year improvement program. They typically do so. They start off with, after the application, they're provided funding, with a request to administer the project. So they have to ask us if they can administer the project. In most cases, there's a few exceptions. And we evaluate their ability, both in terms of project management and financial management, to administer the projects. And it can be whether the project is really complicated, they're a very sophisticated locality, we can give them the project, or the project's too complicated, they're not a very sophisticated locality. We negotiate, and generally we try to politely steer them away from the administration of the project. There's a lot of tricks to them to transportation projects, especially when they have federal money. I like to say the federal money is free money, but it's not easy money. It's, there's a lot of rules you got to follow. So we try to evaluate and make sure the right localities get the right projects they want to administer. And I'll go here in a few minutes, and I'll go over like the size of the program and how many people, how many projects they administer. But generally, once we approve of their administration, we provide for every single project a project coordinator. And that's a VDOT employee that shepherds the site, shepherds the project through our process, and make sure they're hitting all the marks, trying to make sure they hit all the marks, filling out all the forms they got to fill out. Generally, it's making sure that they get that project done as best they can on time and on budget. In a nutshell, that's kind of where we go. That's where we are. Probably a third of my division's work is local administered projects, the guidance, the direction, the policy, trying to streamline things. We do have a commissioner's policy on local administered projects that talks about our philosophy about how we manage these projects. But most important is we do provide oversight, and we do provide every single project a person that they can contact for help.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Sellers.
So looking at these two charts here on the screen, it looks like there's a lot of projects, but not necessarily the same amount of money. So are these smaller budgeting, smaller dollar amount projects?
Typically, the local administered projects are smaller projects in terms of value, construction value. So they may have, and here, I mean, you'll see, we've had as many as almost 38% of the number of projects in the program as local administered, but generally it's less than 30% of the value. This year, we're at 40%, 17%. 17% value, I think I got the notes right. 40% of the number. So they're smaller projects,
And
which
do
is
these-
which is good, because that's what most of those could do. Fairfax, Virginia Beach, some of these big ones, they can manage big projects. Most of them are small projects.
So do these include the ones with the localities that put out, they'll put out transportation bonds that they put like on the ballot?
So if
Referendum.
so if we don't
referendum.
administer it, or they don't add VDOT or federal money to it, then it's outside our 6-year improvement program.
So these are not included in those?
They are not included in there, but many times they will use that money and leverage our money, you know, maybe use that money as a match to some of the
If
local.
there's no federal money and no state money, then it's not,
not in
it's
there.
outside of us.
Okay, okay.
If they use any state money or use any federal money, then we have a different situation. And I'll tell you, particularly for the new board members, we've gotten very performance and metric oriented at our board level and throughout other things we do as well. But and we were having some difficulty over the years with some localities not performing like we wanted them to. And so I think Russ may talk a little bit about that. But we've spent a lot of time working with them, creating scorecards and working with them to get them up to speed so that they're performing at a level that is satisfactory to the Commonwealth, given that Commonwealth's got money there. And so there's been a lot of effort in that regard, and this is all sort of part and parcel of that as we look at this.
I think we've covered this slide with the questions. So the next slide, so as the Secretary mentioned, the performance of local administered projects has long been a topic of discussion in the department and within this board. As I mentioned, in October of last year, the CTB approved a performance policy for local administered projects. That policy requires this annual review, and you should have a copy of the policy in your packet of materials. Is that right, Carol? I think that's right. If you'd like to take a look at that. And it directs the department to use the metrics that are within our program, our locality sustained performance program, alongside the dashboard metrics that you see that are forward-facing for the department, to measure the programmatic success of localities that have the greatest impact on our SYIP. It also requires the department, using the results of what we see after the evaluation, to make recommendations to the board regarding future allocations to localities, where and when appropriate. I gave this presentation or similar presentation last year, but I realize we have a few new boards, so I'm going to go into a little more detail than I normally would have here. The next few slides will go into that detail. So the program does, as I mentioned, focus its efforts on those localities that have the greatest impact on our 6-year improvement program. When we take a close look at our local administered projects program, what we find is about a third of our participating localities manage by far the largest portion of the program, both in terms of number of projects and the value of those projects. It's this third, which generally translates to about 5 or more active projects at a time, managing 5 or more projects at a time, that the program is focusing on. Last year, we saw that about 40% of the locally administered projects represented about 88% of the number of projects and 95% of the value of all local projects. This year, we're seeing about a third of the locally administered projects are representing about 92% of the number and value of the project, locally administered projects. So it's not insignificant. During the development of this program, we spent a little over a year working with locality stakeholders and VDOT stakeholders, identifying those metrics that made the most sense when looking at the actual impact on the SYIP. we identified 3 separate metrics with various sub-metrics that kind of built in that we should look at. And I'll go over each of these separate, but this slide covers the 3: on-time performance, reasonable progress, and fiscal management. For on-time performance, we look at 3 separate measures, or 3 sub-metrics, if you want to say. The first is dashboard performance. This is our outward-facing dashboard for project development. We want to look at how well you're doing over the last 2 years. We want you to hit 70% or better, awarding your projects on time. The second metric that we use, or sub-metric we use, is the current milestones. We track a number of milestones for all local projects. So whether they hit the project agreement, get that done on time, whether they hit scoping on time, whether they hit right-of-way on time, or public involvement on time, et cetera. We want to see that localities are hitting those current metrics, those current milestones, 70% of the time. So that metric measures how you're doing today with your projects today. The previous metric measures how you've been doing over the past 2 years. So we've got a past, we've got a present. And then finally, we want to look at delayed advertisements. These are projects that have been carried over from advertisements from previous years. So what we find is in the metrics, we lose track of these projects that have been carried over. Because if you were ready for last year, you don't count to this year, but they're still being worked on. And they have a significant impact on the ability to get new projects done when you're still working on the old projects. So we track those too. And we want to see that less than 25% of your project portfolio is carryover. So we want you to get those projects done at least within the year that you've requested. So that's on time. Reasonable progress is the ability to manage to deliver the major authorizations that we give localities within a reasonable amount of time. So when we were looking at the development of this program, all the stakeholders agreed that missing a deadline by a day or a week really doesn't measure the programmatic success of a locality. It really doesn't. So we took a really close look and said, well, what does? And what we really care about is whether or not the progress is making good and reasonable progress. Is it moving along? If you're moving along, you're spending your money, you're delivering the project. So to do that, we took the 4 major authorizations, that's preliminary engineering, right-of-way, advertisement, and authorization, and gave them a grace period. And that grace period we chose, for various reasons, was 90 days. So the metrics looks at the ability of the locality to meet 70% of their project authorization dates when given that extra 90 days. We want you to hit 70%. So if you meet 70%, or 70% when I give you an extra 90 days, you succeed. Less than 70%, you fail for this metric. Again, we worked over a year with localities and VDOT staff developing these metrics, so very well vetted. I think everybody was very happy with them. So, and finally, the expenditures of funding provided to us by both the federal government and the state government is extremely important. Every day those allocations are not expended just increases the cost of the projects. Plus, we have deadlines for expenditures of federal funds that provide us little flexibility. We don't have a lot of flexibility with those requirements. So looking at the amount of funding that is available to localities, so this is the money we've given to them that is available today, not programmed in the future, available today. And we think that is a good measure of project progress. So for this metric, we expect the locality to have less than, okay, this is makes a little double negatives here, less than 80% of their available allocations unexpended. So in other words, they need to have spent 20% of their money that's available to them today. Not the money that's available to them in the future. We don't count that. If it's available to you today, you need to have over 20% of it expended. If not, we suspect you're sitting on it, the project probably not moving, something's happening here. They're not billing us, something's going on, something's wrong. And that may sound like it's pretty liberal, 80%, you only have to spend 20%. In this world,
Russ, I
that's
think
not
you're
unusual.
a slide behind, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go ahead. Thank you very much. So there you go. Now, this metric can be a little tricky, and there are some occasions when a high percentage or high value of over 100 million is reasonable, and 100 million is the other threshold. We look at 80% or 100 million. If you're over 100 million and unexpended, we take a close look at you. Very few localities should have over $100 million sitting available to them. So we take a very close look at this metric when we evaluate fiscal management and make sure that it's not something we've programmed for some reason that's putting them in this situation.
Russ, can you go back a second?
Sir.
You don't count their money in the factor. Do we have situations where they, in essence, they spend our money first and they're still behind the curve? They're still behind the performance curve? But do we care? I think we do care.
We do. If they're
I think we
spending our
do
money,
care. No, let's say it's $100 and they got $70 from us, or $50 from us, or whatever it was, and they've spent that $50. So our money, so the available allocation does not include locality supplemental funding to the project, so it doesn't include their money, right?
yes, sir, you're right. We do not look at their money.
So if they've spent all our money on a project, but they haven't spent their money, and so the project's not finished, and it's out there for 10 years, we still wouldn't like it, because our money has not been it's been spent, but the project's not finished, so we're not getting the value.
That's the beauty of these metrics, is they interconnect. So whether we're glad they've spent our money because that helps us with our cash flow and everything but if they're not spending their money, then they're gonna be late.
Right.
They're not gonna be
So
on
you're gonna see that on
time.
the
So I'm
other
gonna see it in
metric.
the other metrics. That's what's the beauty of these metrics, is they all interconnect. Ideally, theoretically, if you're right with one, you should be right with all because everything's going, but that's not the case. Sometimes things happen, things are going on, and that's why we look into it a little more closely. But to answer your question is, if it's their money, they've spent our money, we're okay with this metric. So again, and the other value is 100 million. No one should have 100 million on extenuating circumstances. So generally, a locality is going to be deficient in our program if you're deficient for all three metrics. If you're deficient for two metrics, you can be deficient for number 3, but only if you're over 100 million. So if you're only deficient for over 80% and you're okay with progress and on time, you're okay. But if you've got over 100 million, we're going to take a closer look at you and see what's going on. It's a lot of money for one locality to have. The localities that are identified as deficient are required to collaboratively work with VDOT to develop what we call a project development improvement plan, basically a corrective action plan. And this is approved by the locality executive, district engineer, our local assistance division director, which is me, and our chief of policy. So let's talk about what we did last year. Last year, we identified 13 localities that were deficient, and for various reasons. And as of late August, and they all developed their project development improvement plans and started working with our districts to implement those actions. And we had 3 localities by August that had improved enough to be taken off the list. It's Norfolk, Blacksburg, and Waynesboro. We also have several localities that have improved. And if you saw the performance presentation that Bart gave a couple of months ago, you see the localities have done much, much better with their performance over the past year, and we think this is significant toward those efforts.
Russ, I'm confused. These are the 13, you said some of them were taken off the list, and you mentioned Norfolk. And Norfolk has 3 red flags not meeting performance target.
This is the evaluation. This is where they were. I've got the next slide, or 2 slides down, will show where they are. Yes, sir. So I mentioned the project development improvement plans, or corrective action plans. These are just some takeaways from what we've seen with folks doing that. What we generally see with most localities, they've just got too many projects in their portfolio, and the best thing they could do is reduce their portfolio so that they can manage, that matches their resources. Other significant issues we've seen is they have difficulty with the right-of-way phases. Sometimes get kind of complicated working with utility companies. Many have identified the lack of contractors that are impacting their ability to either attract good bids or even get any bids. Remember, their projects are smaller than ours, so they have a harder time attracting the number of contractors. You know, we're not as attractive. They're not as attractive to most of the contractors. We've seen a number of strategies to help remedy the problems. Again, the most effective is just reduce the number of projects that you're trying to manage. It's easy to get the projects, it's hard to deliver the projects, so let's make that work. Other localities are hiring staff and consultants to manage their work and actually get the specialties in their staff to get the work done. And then many are working with our staff to develop processes that just work better, because we've been doing this a while, we can help them. Again, this is a collaborative approach. We're trying to get folks to do it right and get it done quickly, as efficiently as they can. So that's what we're here for. So looking ahead to 25, on the left you see 2024's. The greens are the localities that have improved and have been taken off the list. The table on the right is the new list for FY25. The yellow localities are new localities. Now, I will stress this is a tentative list. We're still looking at the numbers and evaluating this. I will point to particularly the bottom two localities in Richmond District, Henrico and the city of Richmond. They are only failing because they have over $100 million in unexpended allocations. So we're going to take a closer look at those two to see if there's any reason, justifiable reason that we can find for that. So there's a possibility we can take them off the list, but we're going to look at them first. So here's our new list: three new participants so far, and we'll see where that goes over the next month. So what's next? We're going to finalize the list over the next month. November, we'll notify the final localities of their status, and they'll develop their PDIPs, or Project Development Improvement Plans, update existing plans for those folks that are in their second year, and next year we'll do this all over again. So this year, we're not making any recommendations for changes to allocations. Been 1 year, folks are still working through this. So that's where we are today. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that,
Dunlop.
sorry.
Said Ms. Dunlop, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. You mentioned that sometimes localities find it difficult to have contractors bid on the projects because they're small. Is this a problem of just not having enough businesses in the community, in the locality, or is there something that can be done to encourage more contractors to want to bid on these local projects?
I think you'll see, and maybe the commissioner can add to this, is with the influx of all the money and infrastructure, not just transport, all infrastructure, there's a bottleneck there with the number of folks that can, whether they're professional folks or contractors, that can deliver the projects. We're seeing it everywhere. And if you talk to contractors, you'll hear them say, we're trying to beef up, we're trying to get more staff, we're trying to, where they're doing the same thing, we're trying to find innovative ways to deliver projects. We can only add so many people. So I don't think it's a matter of people not, I think it's just a matter of, it's just the funding is outpacing the
Russ, let me help you with that.
localities.
We
I
have
mean,
so much money in the system right now. Between the uplift we've seen at state revenues, which has driven more state money, the incredible amounts of IIJA money that have come out. And so overnight, you didn't change the construction base. And so more demand, same supply, price goes up, or you don't get a price. And we fight that all the time. We've fought it hard over the last few years. We're very thoughtful in terms of trying to spread our projects out and by location and so forth and so on to deal with that. But at the end of the day, there's just more demand than there is supply, Ms. Dunlop. And And so it just makes it hard all the way around, whether it's a big project or a small project. We're struggling with it. And,
Yeah, let me just say, one of the reasons that this question comes to my mind, as I recall early in our days in Wythe County, talking with people who are in different kinds of construction work, and they talked about, at one point, having 3 crews working full-time, and then they had an economic downturn, and they had to lay off 2 of the crews, so now they had 1 crew who was overworked. And I'm just wondering if we're seeing any, changes from the economic perspective to allow companies like this small company to go back from 1 work team to 3.
I would tell you that I don't know what keeps them from going to 1 to 3 if there's demand, unless they don't have people. And, that has been an issue. We work with folks to build their bases, and certainly we do a lot in the work training area in terms of the Commonwealth. We've consolidated all that in a sort of one czar now, which has really been good. But it's just, the COVID thing was weird. A lot of people dropped out of the workforce altogether. So that's been down. That's now up in Virginia. We have more people working than we've ever had working in Virginia before. But understand these big contractors, these big contracts, they're not necessarily Virginia people. They're coming from all over the place. And so we're competing with other states. Our major contractor, our 2 biggest contracts, I think, going on right now have Spanish, French, and somebody else in them, and American, right? And that's the venture. Right? Now, that doesn't mean they're bringing all Spanish people or all French people or whatever, but there are some of those, and the workers are coming from all over the place. And so that's where we are. It's just so much money, so much demand, and what we're trying to make sure we don't do is to drive our own inflation. And so we're trying to be thoughtful about that. The commissioner works really hard with his team to not to put too much out on the street at the wrong time in the wrong place. And you'll see that as we go through our bids at the action meeting, and we look at bids that are out, that are over our estimates, and why is that? And we work really hard to try to rein that in. So it's a difficult problem. Ultimately, the IIJ money will run out, and that will change things, and we'll get back to more normal, I think. But in the meantime, the money is pushing this whole thing. Yes, sir, Mr. Stamp.
One question, Russ. There are no stated sanctions or penalties for localities not meeting these metrics, are there? Nothing in the program itself that...
Sort of is.
Secretary, Mr. Stant, yeah, the policy does require us, as I mentioned, when appropriate, to recommend changes to allocations to local governments when needed, if they're not performing. So this board can make those decisions when selecting projects.
We don't have to allow them to be locally administered, Mr. Stant. And so if we're having ongoing performance problems, that's going to be one of the sanctions that could occur. You can't do it anymore. We're not going to let you do it anymore.
This program, Mr. Coleman and I usually try to meet, make most all quarterly meetings with the localities, and at least 50% of the time of those meetings is taken up with the review of this program. And it's unbelievable how effective this program is in getting localities to focus on their performance. I mean, this program, I don't know who started it, I don't know who instituted it, but it is a great program, especially when it comes to evaluating performance of the localities. It really works.
Glad to hear that.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Russ, have we finished with you now?
You are done with me.
All right, here's a great project, Mr. Commissioner. Item number 4, the Nimmo Parkway Phase 7B project. Scott, how are you, sir?
Morning.
Welcome.
Thank you. Here this morning to introduce VDOT's role in the City of Virginia Beach's Nimmo Parkway Phase 7B project. Today will be the first in a series of presentations we bring to this board on this project. These presentations will come at key milestones in our work. The presentations are designed to lead up to a location decision by this board, highlighted in the final bubble on this slide. Your location decision will represent the preferred alternative for the project and be documented in our work. VDOT's role in this project is focused on the administration of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. We'll be using a number of different terms over the next few months as we discuss this project, so I thought I'd take a minute to walk through a few of them. NEPA is triggered whenever a federal agency takes a federal action, has impact to federal land, or obligates federal funds. It is the obligation of federal funds to this project that has triggered NEPA. There's a number of different documents that can be used to comply with NEPA. For the purposes of our discussion, there's two to focus on. The first is an environmental impact statement, or EIS, that is used when it is presumed or known that the proposed action will have significant impacts to the natural and human environment. An EIS requires multiple alternatives be considered. The other document relevant to this discussion is environmental assessment, or EA. An EA is completed when it is unknown as to if the proposed action will result in significant impacts. Federal highway regulation allow for EAs to include a single build alternative or to include multiple alternatives for comparison. These multi-alternative EAs and EISs are the most complex NEPA documents, and VDOT retains the right to administer those documents on behalf of a locality if the locality is the project proponent, which is the case we find ourselves in on this project. And as discussed on the previous slide, when we have a multi-alternative NEPA document, we come to this board for a location decision that identifies the preferred alternative in the NEPA document and that Federal Highway then acts on. Getting back to the project, Nimmo Parkway has been considered, studied, and planned for by the city since 1968. It has been constructed as independent projects which achieve localized transportation goals but are all meant to build onto a larger vision of the parkway to improve access to and from the Sand Bridge. As we'll illustrate on the next slide, the initial projects were constructed in the 1990s and early 2000s, with additional segments constructed in 2008 and 2014. Segment 7A is currently under construction, and 7B is the focus of our NEPA work now. So if you focus on the middle of this graphic, you can see the early segments constructed in the 90s and early 2000s. The next segment went east towards the beach in 2008. And then in 2014, the western end of the parkway was constructed. Phase 7A is down by connecting to the beach, and 7B that we're focused on is that orange-red dotted line towards the beach as well. Also point out two federal properties that occur in close proximity to our project. In the top right corner is Naval Air Station Oceana's Dam Neck Annex. And much of the shaded area between the beach and the developed portion of Virginia Beach here is the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, which you'll note abuts segment 7B on both sides of the roadway, proposed roadway, sorry. As I mentioned before, an EA for Federal Highway can include just a single build alternative, and the city undertook an EA to study the 1.8 miles of segment 7B. Federal Highway approved that EA for public availability in May of 2022, and the EA documented the purpose and need to provide reliable access and connectivity to the Sand Bridge community. During that public review, comments from other federal agencies led Federal Highway, VDOT, and the City of Virginia Beach to determine that an EIS was necessary. And in making that decision, Federal Highway also committed that the EIS would include analysis of an improved existing alternative, so an alternative that would study improving existing Sand Bridge Road. A decision to elevate to an EIS was based on the proximity of the Back Bay Wildlife Refuge to the proposed roadway, the potential for impacts to the wildlife refuge property, and the documented abundance of sensitive wildlife and other natural resources in the surrounding area. It's those resources that led a number of the federal agencies to call for an EIS level analysis. So in January 2024, VDOT and the city updated the project agreement to allow VDOT to administer the NEPA process. We spent a few months working with the city, getting up to speed on the project. And in March of '24, kicked off our coordination with agencies under the NEPA process. We've been working with them each month since to develop materials that will not only inform the EIS, but will inform future presentations to this board. That's included a recent public involvement effort led by the city. While it's too early to understand the full scope of the EIS, we do understand, as Federal Highway is committed, the EIS will consider improvements to existing Sandbridge Road, which is the solid yellow line. It'll also continue to study extending Nimmo Parkway as was considered in the EA. That's the dashed yellow line. Any other alternative that's considered will be measured against the purpose and need to determine if it should advance for detailed analysis. Moving forward, we would intend to come back as part of our milestones to this board and brief you on the purpose and need later this year, and then come back again on a range of alternatives late this year or early next year, seeking an action on a location decision in the spring of 2025. As always, that schedule is subject to change based on the conduct of the NEPA process. That's all I had today. Welcome any questions, and thank you for your time.
Does anybody have any questions, Mr. Smizik? Yes, Mr. Stant first, and then
I
Mr.
can go back to
Gasperitz.
the map that
Oh, we'll
showed.
go to Mr. Gasperitz first, and then Mr. Stant.
The yellow black dotted line, is that an existing alignment that is being considered for upgrade?
It is city-owned right-of-way. There is no roadway on it today. It's primarily a utility corridor. It also is home to an informal bike and pedestrian trail that locals use.
But I assume there are alternative access to the beachfront from other roadways?
That yellow line.
Solid yellow
Yep,
line,
okay.
Sandbridge Road is the only access to Sandbridge
Understood.
Beach.
On the dashed line, we'd be transiting the environmentally sensitive area? Is that one of the primary focuses of the study?
So the city-owned right-of-way is mowed and maintained to support the utilities, so it does not have the same resources that the surrounding refuge does, but you're correct. The
Good.
refuge abuts it.
Thank you. Look forward to hearing more.
Mr. Stant.
Yes, sir. Could you go back to the other map? So, the portion of that map shown in yellow has already been constructed, is that correct? And that just goes through, when it was constructed, then none of those neighborhoods were actually there, as I remember. So,
I think the 2008 one was, but I'm not sure about that. Go ahead.
my point is, if this EIS does not work out and we're not allowed to build that dotted line section of this thing, what purpose does the what purpose do the already constructed parts of this road serve? I mean, why would those roads be constructed if that segment is missing? I don't understand the planning that went into this. I don't know whether it's Virginia Beach or VDOT. More than likely, it's Virginia Beach.
I can't speak to the background of how these roads were constructed in terms of how the EIS will consider them. There is the necessity in NEPA to consider past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future projects in determining the impacts of different alternatives. So certainly if you look at an improve existing alternative, you need to consider what would happen to the rest of this roadway. Just like if you consider the city's proposed alternative, you need to consider what would happen to existing Sandbridge Road.
Only other question I guess I have, I mean, this started back in 1968. And why did it take so long to figure out that somebody needed an EIS? It's just, this whole project makes very little sense to me. I mean, I'm not
There
saying,
wasn't any money, Mr. Stamp, back then either, so, they were doing it a bite at a time, basically, and fighting through not only money, but, the environmental, the public sentiment, where does it need to go, and so forth. I mean, you know that as well as I do, and the problem there is that Sandbridge Road is a very difficult road, and you just sort of look at it and see by the way that it proceeds through where it is on the other map, and so this was sort of the alternative there. And Sandbridge has changed so much, as we know down in our neck of the woods, and from 1968. If you drove to Sandbridge in 1968 on Sandbridge Road, you couldn't see the ocean because there was a massive dune in front of you.
absolutely agree.
All the way down the ocean front, and there was nothing that was south. All those houses that were south were not there in 1968. There was nothing down there other than a Coast Guard station and a couple of shacks next door to it. So it's just, now it's just totally changed in terms of population and who lives there, how many people are there, and so this whole road is dangerous, it's curvy, there's been a lot of accidents on it over the years, and so they're just trying to.
And it floods every time it
floods,
rains
yeah.
or the wind blows from the south.
So they're trying to get there a different way, obviously, and they've been trying for years. Mr. Commissioner knows about this road well.
A little bit.
Yeah. Anything we've said that's not accurate, or anything you want to add?
No, I think you've characterized the work of Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach has been taking this one bite at a time. It has, part of this facility has been, they have not allocated the funds to it over this period of time too. That if it was a priority, that they would have advanced it sooner, but we are where we are on this one. And I think this is the last piece to be able to connect back to what you see as Phase 7A, that it is currently under construction to be able to help the ingress and egress of Sandbridge residents during storms and other local events for an all hazards approach, so that they did not have to traverse through Dam Neck to be able to get out safely. So.
If you look at this, basically the 7A makes total sense today regardless, because it's just improving what's there, right? And it takes you back to Sandbridge Road, and the question is, do you have to keep using Sandbridge Road, or can we run down the right of way, right? And that's the whole question, right, Scott? Pretty much. So we'll see how it goes. It's interesting if you start to think about, and I don't know how this works in the EIS. Scott, maybe you can speak to this, or perhaps not, but if I have a lot of accidents on the alternative, and have had a lot of accidents, a lot of property damage, a lot of loss of life, a lot of serious injury, how does that get factored in?
Trying to get to
Because that's really the situation. That's what they're trying to get past here. You got a very windy, narrow flooding road that is the only road that gets to this huge development on the ocean.
your point, sir. The purpose and need that was documented in the EA speaks to providing reliable access. In the EA, when they speak to reliable access, as we've started our discussions with agencies in the EIS, reliable access means Sandbridge Road is open. So whether it's flooding or an accident, Sandbridge Road can be closed for multiple hours at a time. They recently had a truck go into the ditch a couple weeks ago, and the road was shut down for up to 4 hours, I believe. I mentioned Dam Neck Naval Base earlier, Naval Base before. Years ago, they used to offer emergency access through the base if the road was closed. That has obviously, as the world changed, become a tougher ask to make, and the city has a series of criteria they go through before they would ask for that access to be opened up, and they may not be granted if it's offered. So when we talk about crashes on Sandbridge, we're looking to provide more reliable access through that corridor.
Well, what I'm trying to drive down to even more than that, let's just pretend that I have 5 wrecks and it does whatever it does, and the people, there's no loss of life, there's no serious injury. That's very different than if I have 5 wrecks and 5 people die or 10 people die. And the access may or may not be any different, right? But I got dead people. I've got seriously injured people. And to me, that is that should be part of the analysis, right? It's not just the access, it's what happens there in terms of the severity of it, the impact of society. If I got a really dangerous thing, it could be more or less dangerous relative to the access problem. And I'm more focused on the more dangerous ones to get those fixed. And so really, at the end of the day, that's the way it ought to include some analysis in that, but we don't get to decide that necessarily. We can make our case, but, and that's the situation on Sandbridge Road. That's what it is. Mr. Stant, am I right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's the way it is. Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Horsley. Good morning, sir. How are you today? Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
We've got our number 5, WMATA annual reporting requirements. Mr. Todd Horsley, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Todd Horsley, and I'm from DRPT's Northern Virginia office in Alexandria. I'm going to talk to you today about the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, which I will henceforth call WMATA and may slip and call it Metro as well. So this is our annual presentation on WMATA's compliance with Virginia statutory and CTB policy requirements for the receipt of their dedicated capital funding from the Commonwealth. And so in 2018, Virginia joined the District of Columbia and the state of Maryland in providing new dedicated capital funding for WMATA. The funding is to be used for capital and state of good repair purposes, and it is in addition to the normal jurisdictional capital subsidies that are provided to WMATA. The 3 jurisdictions contribute $500 million each year to WMATA, and the Virginia share is $154.5 million a year. The legislation creating the new dedicated capital funding requires WMATA to meet certain criteria each year as a condition of the receipt of the funding. It is, if it is determined that WMATA has not complied with one or more of the items of compliance for the funding criteria each year, then the legislation and the CTB policy require that a predetermined amount of funding be withheld. If a withholding is approved by the CTB, then the funding is withheld from the state contribution to WMATA's jurisdictional subsidies that is passed through to the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and that is the 46.5% of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund that you see in the first bullet on this slide. The CTB, excuse me, to pick up my glasses are not working today. So the CTB policy was approved in 2018 to kind of fill in the details of how compliance would be determined and the mechanism for approval and or withholding of funding. So DRPT was tasked with determining what WMATA's compliance and making a recommendation to the CTB each year, and this is the 6th year that we've done so. So many of you have seen this presentation before. The CTB policy was most recently updated in September of 2018, or I'm sorry, September of 2023 to reflect statutory changes made during the 2023 General Assembly session. So Virginia Code and CTB policy require WMATA to certify compliance in the 5 areas listed there on this slide. WMATA provides documentation and certifications on its compliance to DRPT and the Secretary's Office by prescribed deadlines. DRPT staff analyze the documentation received from WMATA, and we coordinate a review with the Office of Attorney General to ensure statutory compliance. DRPT staff then prepares an annual recommendation to the CTB related to WMATA's compliance with Virginia Code and the CTB policy. Based on the documentation submitted by WMATA, DRPT's staff review and monitoring of WMATA throughout the year, and we do have a full-time staff person dedicated to that purpose. Her sole responsibility is to be our liaison to WMATA and to handle our relations with them. And then we also use information from the OAG when we develop our recommendation. So DRPT's findings and recommendations are presented to the CTB each September, which is today, and the CTB will formally vote on the recommendation in October. So in 2024, the General Assembly, or in its 2023 session, the General Assembly added new compliance requirements, which were amended into the CTB policy in September of 2023, and I'll review those in an upcoming slide. But I did want to just draw your attention to the first bullet on this slide briefly. That is a new requirement that is not related to the dedicated capital funding, and it isn't a part of our annual certification process. Instead, we ensure compliance with that particular provision during the CTB's annual approval of DRPT's 6-year improvement program in June. So that's already been done for this year. And the basic requirement is that the Commonwealth's annual funding allocation to WMATA from the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund cannot exceed 50% of the total Virginia subsidy amount for capital and operating purposes. So the next several slides will cover each of the compliance topics listed in code in the CTB policy that were featured on a former slide. And then each slide follows the same format, so I'll try to move through these efficiently, and there's 5 of these that we'll go through. Excuse me. So with regard to WMATA board governance, the 2018 legislation and the current CTB policy restricts the activities of alternate WMATA board directors to acting only in the absence of primary directors. So the WMATA board secretary certifies compliance by July 1st of each year, and DRPT staff monitor all board meetings throughout the year. WMATA met the requirements of the statute and the board policy for the FY24 fiscal year, which ended on June 30th. There is no enforcement action being recommended by DRPT this year.
Mr. Horsley,
Yes,
it
sir.
may seem sort of strange to some of y'all that this is a requirement. And you know, so there have been regular directors, and then there were alternate directors if the regular director could not be there. And in the past, they would all go to the meeting and they would all participate, and it was sort of a free-for-all. And so somehow or another, they couldn't get that under control, so we had to help them. And basically said, this isn't gonna work like this anymore. And that's where this came from, believe it or not. So now it's a much more orderly process. You only have, you know, one director for one seat, and you don't have all this sort of chaos going on. But that's what this is all about.
Yeah, there are 8 voting members of the WMATA board, 2 from Virginia, 2 from DC, 2 from Maryland, and 2 from the federal government. Then there's 2 alternates from each of those jurisdictions as well. So at one time, all 16 members of the board were attending and
Would they
participating.
recognize to speak? Could they speak or not speak? You know, it was a little bit of, from what I understand, I wasn't involved in it, but so this became part of a legislative requirement that we had to sort out. All right, Mr. Horsley.
So on to number 2, WMATA is required to adopt a capital improvement program covering the next 6 years by July 1st of each year. And they must hold a public hearing in Northern Virginia on that CIP. WMATA has met the requirements of the statute and the board policy for the FY25 fiscal year, which begins on July 1st. There is no enforcement action being recommended by DRPT on this particular topic. So WMATA is also required to update or adopt or update within the preceding 36 months a strategic plan and hold an in-person public hearing on that strategic plan in Northern Virginia. WMATA adopted its new strategic plan, Your Metro, The Way Forward, which is its title, in February of 2023, which included all the plan requirements as of that date. Therefore, WMATA has met the requirements of the statute and the board policy, and there is no enforcement action being recommended by DRPT. The next required update to the strategic plan will be due by June 30th of 2026. I will note that in the policy update that the CTB approved last September, the CTB directed WMATA to include additional components in the strategic plan, and those will need to be incorporated in the next update, which is due in 2026. All right, so Virginia code requires that WMATA approve an annual operating budget in which the total Virginia operating subsidy does not increase by more than 3% over the prior year approved budget. There are operating expense categories that are legislative exclusions to this requirement, which are listed there on this slide. This requirement was actually suspended for WMATA's FY25 and 26 budget cycles by the Commonwealth's biennium budget that was approved in May of 2024 and signed by the governor. Therefore, there is no enforcement action being recommended by DRPT this year. There is a bullet point there at the bottom, just to let you know that absent the 3% cap this year, WMATA's operating subsidy increase between FY '24 and '25 was approximately 39.2%.
Before you move on, Mr. Horsley, let me make note of something that makes this whole thing kind of difficult. And so previous folks put in these restrictions to make sure that they could sort of keep a control of the growth of this organization. But if you see under operating costs, the third bullet, it says any payment or obligation resulting from a legal dispute or proceeding. And that, WMATA sort of has an interesting labor situation where their union and them, by their agreements, I guess, or by the governance documents, if they can't agree, they ended up in arbitration. And the arbiters typically seem to be more favorable to the union's position on wages, benefits. And so they continue to go up and up and up. And that would likely fall under that bullet. And so if the wage increases through the union are driving this increase in costs, any payment obligation resulting from a legal dispute or proceeding, meaning arbitration, or if you're in a dispute with a union otherwise, likely is exempted from this calculation. And so it gets a little bit difficult. Gotten there yet, but that's sort of where we expect you would, all legal stuff, but we'll see. But it makes it, so there's just such, and we'll talk a little bit more about WMATA when Mr. Horsley's finished. But Ms. Dunlop, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask why the cap was suspended, and when I reviewed this material, I was sure it was a typo. I was sure that 39 was a typo.
It's not, ma'am.
But it's not.
The cap was suspended, and that's what I was going to say. I was going to talk more about WMATA in a minute, but let me talk a little bit more about it in a minute. I'll let him finish up, and we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we have one more compliance area to cover. So there were 2 new compliance requirements were added by the General Assembly in 2023, and they were subsequently incorporated into the CTB policy later that year. So number 1, WMATA is now required to submit a detailed annual operating budget, proposed capital expenditures, and financial statements related to its defined benefit pension plans by April 1st of each year. And number 2, the WMATA general manager and the 2 Virginia board members of the WMATA board are required to address the CTB each year. So WMATA has met the requirements of the statute and the board policy. The required budget and financial documentation were submitted in March of 2024, and the WMATA general manager and the Virginia board members addressed the CTB at its October 23rd or October 2023 meeting. So no enforcement action is being recommended. Then with regard to next steps, so in October 2024, or WMATA, or next month, WMATA General Manager Randy Clark and WMATA board members Paul Smedberg, who is the Commonwealth's appointee to the WMATA board, and Loudoun County Supervisor Matt Letourneau, who is the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission's appointee to the WMATA board. They will address the CTB at its workshop next month in Norfolk, and that will fulfill the requirement for the next year. Then at your October 2024 action meeting, the next day after the workshop, a formal resolution certifying WMATA's compliance based on the information contained in this presentation will be presented to you and voted on you by at your action meeting next month. And then we will basically start the process over. By April, WMATA will submit their detailed operating budget and proposed capital expenditures. By July, they will submit the documentation they're required to by then, and then we'll come back and talk to you again in September of next year. So that concludes my presentation, but happy to answer any questions I can.
Ms. Sellers.
The strategic plan requirement, that's a state code requirement, or is that in compliance with the federal code?
That is a state code requirement. DRPT does require all of our larger agencies to develop and submit a transit strategic plan, but that's an every 5-year exercise. For WMATA, it's actually encoded every 3 years.
So have we considered requiring them then to add in an annual update? Similar to the federal government requires that annual where you have to say, this is how we're going to improve through this year. And looking at that 39% increase, I'd have some questions because that's a large,
Well, let's
3
get,
years
let,
is a big,
let me,
big gap.
let me
So
address
just-
some of that when we get to it. Mr. Gaspert's had a hand up to it.
Well, I had a question somewhat in line with Ms. Seller's question. Todd, could you go back to the capital reporting requirements? So understanding the responsibility of this board, as you know, I've been challenged with this for the 6 years that we've had. When we sign off or when we approve the capital improvement plan, are we improving the effectiveness and the appropriateness of those expenditures? Simply that they have one. And I go back to the intent of the legislators in 2018, when the system was woefully behind in scheduled maintenance, when literally an everyday problem, and when scarce funds were allocated by 3 jurisdictions to create a $500 million fund to offset and start to reduce the backlog of deferred maintenance and improve the overall state of good repair. So I'm somewhat confused on what our role is, and I guess to Ms. Seller's comments on reporting, it would be my expectation that part of our review of this would include an assessment generated by Metro that showed that we were making progress in improving the overall condition of the system from a safety perspective primarily, secondarily from an efficiency perspective. But what I see here is just that we're checking a box that they have a capital improvement program. So help me understand what our role is or what it should be in this vote.
The role, what it should be is directed by the legislature and the governor together. Is Chandra here today? Chandra, can you come up for a second, please? So this is Chandra, this is a legislatively directed requirement, right? And it says what it says. It doesn't say what you said. Connor, you can speak to what it says, but it is a bit perfunctory, in my view. And it doesn't speak to us having to analyze the capital improvement plan and whether we agree with the capital improvement plan or progress in the plan. It doesn't speak to that. Am I correct, Chandra?
That's correct, Mr. Secretary. It is somewhat of a perfunctory check-the-box analysis. I believe there is reliance placed on the Commonwealth's appointees to the WMATA board to do some of that behind the more vigorous legwork.
So let's back up for a minute. Let me just dive more into this. Maybe it'll help us a little bit. So all these provisions have happened over time, some driven by the legislature, some driven by others, because they were concerned about how this entity was operating and how much money it was taking up. So these things have come in over time. Last year, Ms. Dunlop, the General Assembly and the Commonwealth agreed to help fund a huge deficit. The deficit was originally brought to us at $750 million. That was an annual operating deficit, not a one-time thing. That was annual. Came to us with that early on when Mr. Clark got to WMATA, and of course, everybody sort of gasped, but we really knew it was coming. And then they did a couple things. One is they were able to shift some of their operating budget to their capital budget, which they can borrow to fund. And that's allowed under the statutes and the rules and regs and so forth. It's sort of like heavy maintenance could go to capital. So they moved about hundreds of millions of dollars to capital, took it out of the operating budget, which reduced the deficit. And then they had savings of about $50 million, okay? And so, other than that, the deficit remained, and they couldn't pay their bill, right? They weren't going to be able to pay their bills. And so at the end of the day, the Commonwealth, the state of Maryland, and DC agreed to fund that over the next 2 years to help give them time to sort all this mess out. So we've spent thousands of hours in my shop and in the administration pouring through WMATA's stuff. We've had multiple meetings with their management. The governor's had them in. We'll have them in again next week to have more discussions. At the end of the day, it appears that what WMATA's view is that they just need to find more money. That's their plan. Go find me more money. And they're looking at tax increases in Northern Virginia. They're looking at all sorts of things that they're floating. And so that's sort of where they are. They're not in the mode of how do we make that deficit 100 million, not 750. They're in the mode of how do we fund the deficit? Where do we go get the money? That's the mode they're in, pure and simple. So we don't like that mode. And I will tell you that last week, I sent a letter to the chairman of WMATA that challenged them on something they were intending to do. So at the board meeting last week, they had a resolution that they were going to consider where in their year that just ended, 24, they actually had some surplus money, like $28 million at the end of the day. And they were going to set up a new fund. They styled it as a reserve fund that would be there to take advantage of unforeseen and unknown opportunities in the future. And they want this fund to be $250 million, is what the resolution set out. So that they, in essence, could have a pot of money and do with it what they wanted to as it became aware of opportunities. So here you go with Washington, with DC and Maryland and Virginia, who've begrudgingly come to the rescue with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're going to say, oh, by the way, we had a surplus, so we're going to take this money and we're going to stick it over there and we're going to save it for ourselves. And oh, by the way, we're going to continue to do that till we get to $250 million. And I had a large problem with that. The Secretary of Maryland had a large problem with that. And unfortunately, Maryland is a much worse economic situation than Virginia. And he is starving. He's cut his entire budget by 10% across the board. They're not doing stuff. They're deficit funding. They can't fund their transportation plan. And so they sucked it up and found this hundreds of millions of dollars like we did. And now somebody wants to say, well, you know, I'm just going to take some of that for my own. So we pushed back pretty hard and said it was unacceptable to us. Maryland threatened to veto it. So in the way the boards work, as was indicated, each entity has 2 members, and a locality or a member jurisdiction, meaning D.C., Maryland, or DC or the federal government. Or Virginia, if both your board members vote against something, it's dead. If one of your members votes against it and the other abstains, it's dead. So any jurisdiction can have a jurisdictional veto. And in Maryland, they pretty much, we appoint one, MVT appoints one, so I don't have a direct sort of line on one of our board members, but in Maryland, they have direct lines, and they were going to vote no. And so it ended up getting pulled and put aside. But that's where we are with them. And we'll continue to work with them to try to get them to understand. They're also at the same time introducing some expanded service, which may or may not have been a good idea in the future, but certainly today is not a good idea in our view, because all it's doing is driving the deficit. Their service does not even come close to paying for itself, right? I mean, I think it's about, the fare box is just de minimis to the cost. So every time you add service, you're just adding net deficit, if you will, every time you expand. So our view has been, you've got to get your house in order You've got to find a way to deal with this deficit. It's not okay just to all of a sudden have a $750 million deficit, and everybody's supposed to just say, okay, we're going to cover that and move forward. We're not going to do that. It's too much, it's too expensive. We've had lots of presentations to this board, and you've seen some of the costs curves and things that have changed with them over time. But at the end of the day, it appears to me, and appears to Maryland, that their whole concept is just find me another pot of money. Our problem isn't we're spending too much money. Our problem is you're not giving us enough. And that's where they are. Ridership is drastically different. It's a system that's very, very, very important in Northern Virginia. It's very important in Northern Virginia. And its sustainability is very important in Northern Virginia. But the track that they're on is not a sustainable track, in my view. And I don't think the citizens of Virginia, or Northern Virginia even, are going to step up to a large tax increase to fund something that has not been fiscally well managed. And so that's where we are. So all this is sort of, I won't call it window dressing, but it's all attempts over time to sort of rein some of this in. It is not sufficient, Mr. Gasperitz.
Council used the word perfunctory.
I used to begin with, and she parroted it. It's a bit perfunctory, but it is legislatively driven, and we follow the law. So that's our situation with WMATA. As I said, we'll meet with them again next week in Richmond. They'll come see us, and we'll have more discussions along this line. But they're not hearing what we're saying. I just have to tell you, we do have some money that was included in the budget, $500,000, that they are to use to hire some people that we had sort of given some suggestions on to come in and really do some operational cost analysis work to see where we can drive some cost out of this thing. But that has not occurred yet. That will occur coming up. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to be able to convince a very fiscally challenged Maryland, a fiscally challenged District of Columbia as well, and us to continue to just throw money at the problem. I just don't think that's going to happen. So they're going to have to get real in terms of finding a way, and whether if you have to shrink some service or shrink something, you just can't have these kinds of out of control deficits happening. It's just not sustainable. Yes, Ms. Sellers.
Seeing a regional entity like WMATA is similar to these regional jails and any regional body where you pay in these subsidies and they go through the same problems. And they ask for the money, and localities who have to pay into them are always asking, what are we getting for this? And as the subsidies increase, people want to say, oh, we don't want to pay into it. So it's the same problems, whether you're talking about WMATA, or you're talking about a jail, or you're talking about your regional economic development authority, or your regional alliances, or whatever they are. In our area, our dump, or whatever it's called, I can't think, the landfill. But there's a cost associated with that. And so maybe not expanding services won't drive down the cost, but maybe reducing services isn't going to save money either. So we do have to have a conversation of how much does it cost to run WMATA, similar to the state has put in a large sum of money to make an investment there in Hampton Roads to support the port. And so this is a budget driver for the Commonwealth there in Northern Virginia, similar to the port is, similar to other things in Virginia. So, we do have to have a serious conversation and maybe looking at some performance standards for WMATA that are not just every 5 years or every 3 years, and it's not just a checkbox, but actually sitting down and putting some thought behind it and saying, let's tell the taxpayers, let's tell the citizens what they're getting for their money. Because we've heard people aren't using it. Since I've been on the board, we've heard the federal government's not using it. We've heard that people aren't using it, all these things. So it hasn't solved the problem. So maybe it's time we sit down with WMATA and say, let's dig into your budget. Let's see what the problem is.
Ms. Sellers, we've been doing that for a year and a half. but we're way ahead of you. The bottom line here is this board does not have a lot of tools in its tool chest in terms of WMATA. We have legislatively directed things that we do. The money goes to them by legislation, by statute. It goes to them unless some of these things don't happen. And that's where we are as a board. Now, the administration's a little different, the General Assembly's different, but you're 100% right. But that is something we've been doing for the last year and a half on a very frequent basis. The question at the end of the day is, how do you get, we have 2 members from the federal government, 2 members from Virginia, 2 members from DC, and 2 members from Maryland. And they're very different places, and they have very different views. And so how do you get everybody aligned on what this is gonna, how you're gonna wrestle with this? At the end of the day, because of the fiscal issues that are obvious, particularly in Maryland and in DC, they're singing off the same sheet that we're singing off in Virginia, because they've got a practical problem, which is they're not flush with cash to keep throwing it at this thing, even if you wanted to. They just don't have that cash. So something's going to give here. And as I indicated to you, we've been working with the CEO. He's a competent guy. We're trying to work closely with him, but it appears that the whole emphasis by this is to, by the WMATA group, is to just raise more revenue. There's a group called DMV Moves, which Deputy Secretary Sargent is involved with. DMV does not mean the Division of Motor Vehicles, it means DC, Maryland, Virginia. And it's basically a working group between some WMATA folks and the COG, Council of Governments up there, to try to work on this. But that's what you're seeing out of these groups is, where do we go get money? Not how do we cut costs, not how do we right size, not how do we make this thing sustainable. How do we go find another $1 billion? That's what they're after.
Well, maybe they need to say, how do we make it more sustainable? How do we justify the money we have instead of we need more money?
I know that. We've been telling them that for a year and a half.
And the optics aren't there, especially as the bus system is getting better in Virginia and moving people. It's not looking good for WMATA right now. We're not hearing as much that, oh, we need a metro line to Woodbridge like you used to hear. Now people are more than happy to take the Omni ride to Woodbridge, to Spotsy, to Stafford.
Well, remember, Metro is a bus service as well. It's not just, WMATA has a bus service as well. It's not just the rail, but Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. What is the final?
No, it's not, but it's somewhere in that region. Depends on riders, it depends on track miles, it depends on all sorts of, there's an algorithm. There's an algorithm. Ms. Casperts.
So I recall, I think it was
We're the
2000
lowest percent, I think. Virginia's the lowest, but it's
2007. The Commonwealth commissioned Ray LaHood to do a comprehensive study on the metro system. I believe that information that came from that helped to inform the General Assembly's decision to appropriate $154.5 million for state of good repair. How much of that report that was done in 2017 is relevant to our current situation? I'm assuming that was the last comprehensive study that was done.
That is the last comprehensive study, and Mr. Sargent's going to come speak to that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kasperowitz, so we've taken a hard look at the 2017 study and refreshed some of the figures. A lot of it certainly is relevant, certainly to look at unit costs and some of the thoughts the former secretary had on governance. I think one piece that is missing from that study that didn't necessarily get a lot of attention was it looked at the average compensation for the workforce. It did not look at the size of the workforce. And so when you look at Metro's workforce, it's significantly larger when you size for its ridership and its service than comparable systems. And so we've taken a look at some of the things like that report didn't cover. And to the Secretary's point, we've covered this extensively with Metro and other stakeholders. And I think, and to Ms. Seller's point, I think there is a bit of a, I think PR misunderstanding. I think with the general public, I'm not sure they quite recognize the cost implications of Metro, but on the informed stakeholders and Metro side, I think it's less a lack of understanding with some of the challenges and more just a will to go in and make hard decisions, frankly.
I guess my question would be, given the 39.2% increase in operating expenditures, is it time for us to consider a refresh of that study to bring it up to current? That was now 7 years ago.
Ms. Kasperitz, let me, and Ms. Sellers, let me be clear. We have been doing this kind of work with WMATA for 18 months, 2 years. We understand what their problems are. We have documented them, we've talked to them, we've sat down with them, we've made presentations to General Assembly members, we've made presentations to WMATA board members, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And issue is a reluctance on their part to say, I gotta fix my thing, I gotta fix my entity and drive the cost down. There's just a reluctance. They don't think that's the right course. They want to keep going the way that they have been going in terms of cost curve that they're on, and they just want the partners to fund that. It's just that simple.
I understand that.
And you know, like, we're just going to say no. So this emergency money, it's up 39% because all this emergency money. So we had to include the cap, ignoring the cap, or else it would have triggered the provision here. So it's a difficult place. As I said, we'll have them back in next Wednesday. We're going through this. This is a decision that at the end of the day, Northern Virginia localities, the Commonwealth of Virginia, has to decide how much they're willing to go. And if they're not willing to do it, they're just going to have to tell them we're not willing to do it. So we had a long fight about it earlier. We wanted more teeth in what we were going to do with the legislation and the budget. Got some teeth, but not as much as we wanted to have. And so a legislative thing we got to get through, and we don't have ultimate control. We have one board member we appoint. The legislation says, the statute says what the statutes say, and to sort of upend that, we need help. So we've been beating the drum and showing the information and explaining it to folks. And as I said, because Maryland and DC are so fiscally tight, regardless of their philosophy on what they'd like to see, it's a practical matter. There's just not enough money to continue to do it this way.
Secretary,
Absolutely.
I fully support the approach that is being taken in reviewing this matter, but it seems to me that one absent party is the federal government. Much of the issue you're dealing with here is the result of the federal government, federal agencies generally not having a return to the office policy. I'm sure many of us who've called them about other matters are fully aware of that. But that is one of the really revenue challenges we have here. WMATA cannot be permitted to become a second or even third-rate mass transit system. The United States of America, presumably the preeminent national capital in the world, in the DC area, cannot reflect appropriately on our country if it has a second or third-rate transit system. But I believe some of the funding responsibility for that needs to be carried by the federal government. And I think that the Commonwealth and the other parties to this have generally been generous in trying to keep this thing financially afloat, and it is not. So keep up the good work, and I hope you can get the federal government, which has considerable funds, it seems, for all kinds of projects, to put this one on the list.
Well, I will tell you, Dr. Smoot, we have pushed on the federal government. The governor's pushed on the federal government. We've written a letter to OPM and others that said exactly that. I will tell you, though, that while that is a substantial piece of the problem, it's by nowhere near the whole problem. And even if that ridership was back, right, you'd still see substantially large deficits. And so it's just been exacerbated by what you're talking about. Yes, it's definitely a problem, and we've been pushing on it. So this is all going to get sorted out one way or another, because, you know, at the end of the day, they're either going to get what they need or they're not. They're going to have to they have to deal with what they have. But so it's a difficult problem. We've been all over it. We've been clear with them and with the folks that we deal with on it. Deputy Secretary Sergeant, I mean, I said we spent thousands of hours on it. We've spent thousands of hours on it. And he's become an expert on WMATA. So we'll continue to work to where we're working to, but this is really more of a legislature and an administration thing than it is a board thing. We just don't. Anyone else? I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll be back. Thank you. If I can call us back into order. Appreciate it very much. We're on item number 6, Director's items. Mr. Zach Trogdon, our Acting Director of DRPT, excuse me. Zach,
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you. I would just refer members to the report in your packets for most of the information, and certainly contact us if you have questions. I would point out one particular item, especially germane to Blacksburg. Do I need to go? I don't need to go through the slides, do I? The Virginia Breeze, which is our intercity bus, recently moved their stop at Virginia Tech to a multimodal center that was built around the Perry Street parking garage. So I think it's much more convenient for students, connects up to local routes better. So certainly happy about that. It was at the Squire Student Center. I think it's much safer, much more, much more accessible. So that was a nice development. But otherwise, again, any questions about information you see in that report or anything else, give us a call. Also, there was something with the Passenger Rail Authority, but I think the Secretary will speak to that in a bit. Nice development. So thank you.
Yeah, just a small development, Zach. I think as the board is aware, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority completed a deal about 10, 11 days ago now to change how we were going to operate here in the New River Valley, the plan there, and amended it to include some acquisition in Northern Virginia. And we've talked about that in the board before, but the new members haven't heard it. And so at the end of the day, back in 2018, I guess it was, or 2018, 2020, the Transforming Rail in Virginia program that was started in previous administration had included a stop for the passenger rail, getting it all the way down to the New River Valley, if you will, which is synonymous with Christiansburg area. And unfortunately, in their rush to do that, as those things happen, they made an announcement about schedule and cost. And they had 0% design and 0% engineering. They did the best they could to come up with schedule and cost, given that's where they were. And as you can imagine, that never really works out too well because you don't know what you don't know. And so as we got into that, as the board got into that, the cost ballooned and skyrocketed, like tripled and more than that. And there was incredible engineering issues to overcome. Dr. Smoot had led the charge for years to try to work through that process. The board looked at the board meaning the VPRA board, looked at a different, we get to play fire drill. So we are going to recess.
ATV things.
Gentlemen, y'all ready? I'm calling us back to order. We were talking about the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and the New River Valley. And as I indicated to you, so as the staff got deeper into the project, costs ballooned and skyrocketed, and there was all sorts of engineering difficulties. There was a tunnel that was deficient, that was in the way. We looked at another location, and there was a mountain of stuff we had to move. And anyway, long story short, it was not working out so well. And DJ Stadler, our CEO at the Rail Authority, and Director DeBrule, who at the time was our director of DRPT and by virtue of that, chairman of the board, got busy with Norfolk Southern and came up with a new plan. And so originally, the plan was we had purchased what was known as the V line, I think it's the Virginia line, which was a sort of a spur line. I call it a spur line. It wasn't the main line. And that's all we were able to get on to get to the New River Valley. And that created all sorts of issues, as I indicated, in terms of the design and engineering and the path and so forth. And so what we ended up with was selling back the V line to Norfolk Southern, where they got full compensation for, including the money that they had put into it and interest and everything else. Purchasing the N line, the ability to get on the N line there, as opposed to the V line, which put them on the main line, which opened up an opportunity to be in a different location. And the location is a preferred location. It actually is a location with a historic station there that could be refurbished into a station. VPRA does not do that work. Localities do that work, but place. So not only did so we did that, and then on top of that, when they had been negotiating originally, they had wanted to also try to acquire the Manassas line. This is going back in the original deal. And they just could not get close to coming to terms on what that was worth or what they were willing to pay for it, and so it didn't happen. In this case, it was resurrected, and we were able to purchase that line, the Manassas line, which brings all sorts of strategic value to passenger rail and commuter rail in Northern Virginia, including being able to facilitate night and weekend service for VRE, and being able to dispatch, in essence, control your own destiny there. And so all of that was done. The sale back, the new line, the new access on the N line, the purchase of the Manassas line, all that was done. And we're going to get there 2 years earlier and save 50 to 100 million bucks off of what we would have paid otherwise. So a really, really good deal that was negotiated by our folks, and I want to congratulate them. So we're going to get here earlier, and we're going to get here cheaper, and we're going to get here better, and we're going to have the Manassas line at the same time, which is just really a really great, a great result from a situation that was troubling. And so that's what Zach was referencing. I will tell you that serendipity is always helpful, and that part of what made this deal work is that Norfolk Southern had a need, and they had a like-kind exchange opportunity, and we fed into that, and so it made the deal much more palatable for them and made it more palatable for us. Tax treatment situation. So we're really excited about it. I will tell you that the people trying to give me credit for it, but I don't really deserve the credit. DJ and his team and Jen and that group really deserve the credit. I know the Norfolk Southern guy well, and he lives down the street, and I leaned on him a little bit, but other than that, in a proper negotiating way. But the truth is, it's just really a great result, and it's going to be really good for this part of the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth at large. And the Manassas line is really, really going to be important to We're very excited about that opportunity. That deal was closed, I think, on the 5th of September, so we're moving forward. And we're excited to bring passenger rail to New River Valley a couple years ahead of what we had slipped to and save the Commonwealth a bunch of dollars and get a much better result. Out the New River Valley and passenger rail, and today we're going to go out and look at that area so you can see sort of where we are and where we're going to end up. And that'll be part of our look-see this afternoon.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, sir, Mr. Casper.
So what's the date for service with,
Michael?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kasperwitz, the new target date for service is no later than 2027. So at least a year earlier than currently planned, and potentially, if the stars align, could be earlier than that.
We're pushing really hard. Can we get it into 2026? I don't know. But we're gonna try to bring it as fast as we can bring it. That's what I would tell you. No later than 2027. Anyone else? All right, thank you. Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, I have two items for your consideration today. The first, you will find in your package the initial financial plan for Route 58 widening, which is called the Vesta section of this. This project is about a 4.5-mile long proposed widening project, as well as a greenfield project to be able to realign Route 58 from a 2-lane facility to a 4-lane divided roadway. Predominantly for safety reasons, this is a continuation of the Route 58 corridor. We have the Lover's Leap project that's currently under construction now. We did have the chance to visit that project here in the last 2-3 weeks, which is an enormous project in itself. But this is to improve, again, the 4.5 miles, converting it 2 lanes to 4 lanes, as well as widening out the shoulders. The project value that is in your financial plan is a $245 million project. And so this project, as well as, you'll hear more about it in the coming months. We do have it under procurement right now. It's a design-build project. Request for qualifications closed earlier this summer, so we are in the request for proposal stage. I anticipate bringing this before the board early part of 2025 and getting it under contract by then. Any questions on that?
Questions? Thank you.
The second item that I would have for you, and if I could have Russ come up to the podium and be recognized. So as Russ is coming up to the podium, many of you know that this is Russ's last meeting before the board. It was a little bit of the Russ Dudley show this morning, on a little bit on purpose with that. Russ, you're going to find at the podium recognition folder for you there. Russ has 23 years of service with the department. He started in our environmental division, rotated into our Richmond district for a period of time, and then came back as the local assistant division director, and has served as the director of local assistance for the last 5 years. Prior to service with the department, he served as a solid and hazardous waste specialist at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. So, Russ, congratulations on a well-deserved impending retirement at the end of the month. Appreciate your service and leading the local assistance group through many of the changes. Frankly, the local sustained performance program and marshaling that through has been a huge success. He's going to go out with a bang this week and finish it out with the local programs workshop, which is one of our larger workshops that touches many of the communities and helps us deliver those projects that you saw in Russ's presentation this morning. So congratulations, Russ, for a job well done.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure. Thanks. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you. I'm not going to say anything, but appreciate it.
Mr. Commissioner, you finished?
I am.
You know, just picking up on our comments about Mr. Dudley, it's been clear to me for some time, but it's even been more clear, having been the secretary for a few years now, is the quality of the folks that are in the Transportation Secretariat in Virginia. And VDOT is the largest piece of that, by far. And VDOT, as I have told board members before, as we travel around the countryside to various national conferences or places where other secretaries and DOT CEOs gather, VDOT is just universally seen as at the top of the heap. And it's an organization that is emulated and studied and looked at by everybody else. And I don't know if you're number one commissioner or number two or number three, but you're not number 15, I can promise you that, in terms of how people view us, right? So, and they view us that way for a reason, and the reason is called results and success, right? And so we're just blessed to have really good people who do really good work, and Russ is emblematic of that. And so I just want to add my thanks, Russ, for all you've done and putting up with me a little bit, and just all you've delivered to the Commonwealth for your service. And I just want to thank you and add my thanks to everyone else who's in the commissioner. So thank you very much. Since we're down in this neck of the woods, I want to talk about a couple things as well. We spent, a couple weeks ago, I was here with the governor in the Bristol district, and last week we were in the Salem district, and we'll be up and down this 325-mile long corridor called I-81 over the next numbers of. The governor is very focused on the importance of 81 to the Commonwealth, certainly to the Valley, and actually to the nation, as it you know, has so much transit of cargo and commerce up and down that corridor. So we're out here celebrating the work that's happening. The 81 program started from scratch, zero, 2019, basically, zero, an idea, right? And we're building stuff. We've done most of the operational projects already. We're getting into the big projects, the big construction projects. Our current budget is about $4 billion. The great news about that is that is the current budget. And every year we add about $200 million to the next year because the revenue stream is continuous. And it kicks about $200 million into the program. So we'll continue to add more projects. When we originally looked at this in the prior administration, I think there were 120-some projects that were looked at. But of course, they couldn't do 120-some projects in the time with the money that they had. So they boiled it down to 64, and about half of those were operational projects they were smaller. Some of them were signaling and that sort of stuff, and some small, you know, putting in rumble strips and putting in some acceleration lanes and some stuff that were smaller. And most of those have been completed, and they will dovetail into supporting the other bigger projects that are going on now. So right now, I think our plan is through 2032, 2033, Commissioner?
A little longer.
It's 36?
Yes.
36. Getting my dates confused, folks, sorry. But there'll be a 37, and there'll be a 38, and there'll be a 39, and future boards will continue to improve 81. And when I say improve 81, we got a new tagline that I think is really more telling about what this is all about. And it's called Unlock 81, Unlock I-81. And it unlocks it in so many different ways. It unlocks it in terms of just the regular folks that need to go up and down it in the communities. It unlocks it for opportunity, for economic development opportunity, as people can move through and get to where they need to go. It unlocks an increased quality of life for folks in the Valley and for folks across Virginia as it drives more commerce and more business. And, you know, we saw this morning a economic development program, Mr. Stant, of $190 million in Russell County, right? Russell County is not, you know, like in the middle of the metropolis, but it is adjacent to I-81, pretty close to I-81. And I'm not sure how they're getting all the salt water there, Mr. Stant, but I'm sure they figured that out. But it's those kinds of opportunities up and down this corridor. And I will tell you, as a native Virginian who's lived here my entire life, I spent a fair amount of time around the state, but over the last 5, 8, 10 years with this board, I've spent more time in Southwest than I had previously. And it's a changed place. You know, and this here in Roanoke is sort of the beginning of it, right? We're at the head of it. But you go down to Abingdon and go down to Bristol and go to Wythe. And just the nature of the place has changed. And it hasn't gotten, and it's not in a bad way, it's been in a good way. And as I said when we were in Bristol not so long ago, I said, you know, there's plenty to do here, right? There's enough of what you want, but it's still rural and nice and easy. I think the Bristol Hotel just got recognized as one of the best hotels around in some publication somebody was telling me about, and they have a rooftop bar. But I mean, it's just a different, it's just, yeah, we've been there. It's just really nice to come to this part of Virginia. And so the governor's very focused on it, as many folks are, to unlock the potential here down through this whole corridor up from Winchester all the way down to So we're just excited about that opportunity. We're going to continue to try to find ways to accelerate. The commissioner has been able to do that as we've moved money around a little bit and changed some things around. He's been able to move some projects forward. We focused on efficiency and saving money. You were briefed on a project you all moved around, helped us move around. It saved us $80 million or so because we did it at the same time. So we're always looking, Ms. Dunlop, for those kinds of efficiencies as well. So it's really exciting to be part of that. The governor's very focused on it, and we'll spend some more time up and down this corridor talking about it and trying to make sure that we do it really well and really quickly. And like most projects, probably by the time we leave office in 14 months, 16 months from now, they'll hate us here because they'll be complaining about all the orange cones and the congestion that comes with progress. It's sort of the way I feel about the Ham Roads Bridge Tunnel right now, Freddie, Mr. Stant. We asked for it, now we're getting it.
Then you gotta maintain it.
You know, it's gonna be a struggle, Commissioner, for the next couple of years down in Hampton Roads. It's gotten a little bit messy. But the light's at the end of the tunnel, no pun intended. And it's gonna double the facility and it's gonna be a game changer. So we'll do the same thing here. We're gonna continue to work on it. It's a very, very strategic and important corridor in Virginia. And there's a lot of money flowing to it, a lot of attention, and we'll continue to build and build and build to get it to be where it needs to be. Make it safe, make it reliable, and make sure that it helps us unlock this part of Virginia. So we're really excited about that. We also spent some time, I think it was last week, but it may have been the week before, I guess it was the week before, down in Suffolk. And in Suffolk, the governor had made an allocation of $30 million or so of TPOF money, the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund money, that the legislature made some changes in the program over the last couple of years. But we were able to do the things that we talk about here so often as one of our problems. We were able to get beyond that, if you will. And what we were able to do is to help Suffolk get ahead of a problem that was going to get created by a large development. And as you know, through our smart scale process particularly, things have to get bad before our system fixes them. And we tried to we made some changes in our scoring process to try to address that, but it's not going to be fully sufficient. It will help. And so in Suffolk, there's a project down there that is really tied to the port. It's a company out of Maryland named Matan, and they have some other investors, the Rockefeller. Japanese investors. And all in, it'll be a $750 million project, and they'll build almost 5 million square feet of warehouse space to serve the port. Speculative, interesting, right? That tells you the confidence that they have in the port and in this, in the Commonwealth. So we kicked that off and did some groundbreaking. And as I indicated, the Commonwealth share is to try to improve the road system that's going to be a problem once it gets built if it's not improved. And so instead of doing what we normally do, which is we wait till it gets messed up and then we fix it, we get ahead of that with this mechanism, the partnership opportunity. So say, okay, this is going to get created. It's going to be a mess. Here's the modeling. Let's go fix it and get the road straight up front. And that's what we're. A really great opportunity. It's something we've been working on to get ahead of some of this, of this, like the way we do these things, and to make sure that the citizens down there have a really good system, traffic well when these folks come. So those are a couple of things we've done in the last couple of weeks that relate to transportation, and we'll continue to be on the road working projects up and down this corridor and across the Commonwealth. Is what I want to tell you today. Does anybody have any questions for me? Mr. Coleman?
Secretary, would you mind making any comments or be willing to make comments about the gap? Because I think that's another important project that's moving forward.
Well, yeah, the gap, the gap, as most of you know, is the 30-mile stretch of 64 basically between York County and Rico. And it's a project that was, that would close the gap, if you will, and make that highway 6 lanes instead of 4 lanes. And if you drive that very often, which I do, you will know that when you get to the gap, it's sort of like you're going into a tunnel. And everybody slows down, and everybody hangs in the left lane, and traffic just bogs down, and it's just not good. So one of my priorities when I came here was to close the gap. And the problem was it's a lot of money like everything else, and it wasn't in the system. But we found a way to get it in the system, and with the help of the legislature, particularly Chairman Knight at the time, we got a big slug of money that allowed us to do that. So we're making progress. There's always issues as we go through that, but we're on target still, Mr. Commissioner. We'll work through the environmental things that have popped up we're working through, but at the end of the day, we're still on target for, when will we complete?
Complete 27, 28.
27, 28. Let's call it the train time. Let's call it 27. We'll do the train and the gap all at the same time. But that'll make a big difference in it, and you already see it. So, I mentioned this company, Matan, or Matin, I should say, I guess it is. It's a family name, so I should pronounce it right. They just bought a huge tract of land in New Kent County, right? Massive warehouse right there where Buc-ee's wants to go. And so you just see this tremendous development that's happening in that portion of Virginia. And it's happening because we're investing in the road system, and because the port is there, and because we got a great workforce, and et cetera, et cetera. So that area is just explosive right now. And we'll continue to see that. We'll continue to see development there associated with the port and others. And our road system from the port to 95 or 295 will be outstanding. Place.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. We are going to adjourn the workshop meeting, and I'm going to convene the action meeting. And the first item on our agenda is public comment. Do we have any public comment here today? Anybody want to say anything? Okay. The second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The minutes were distributed in your package. Are there any comments, corrections, or?
Second.
Sellers moves approval. And we got a second. Thank you very much. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Ms. Sellers. Thank you, Ms. Green. Appreciate it. All right, the first numbered item agenda is item number 1. It's action on the commemorative naming of a request to King George County on the bridges over Route 301, James Madison Parkway, King George County, et cetera. And Mr. Kevin Gregg is going to speak to us about that. This would be a memorial naming or commemorative naming for Deputy Craig Lamont Brooks Memorial Bridge.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Gregg.
This commemorative naming is in Fredericksburg District. As the Secretary said, in King George County, northbound and southbound lanes of the bridge on U.S. Route 301, James Madison Parkway, over the upper Machuduck Creek, Deputy Craig Lamont Brooks Memorial Bridge. Deputy Craig Lamont Brooks of King George, Virginia, assigned to the King George Sheriff's Office, was killed in the line of duty on May the 15th, 1998. VDOT has not received any public comment on this proposal.
So we have a resolution that has come from a request by the Board of Supervisors to name this in honor of Mr. Brooks. Do we have a motion to approve? Ms. Sellers moves and Mr. Coleman seconds. Would you please join me, if you're affirmative, by standing to signify your affirmative vote? Thank you. Greg, item number 2, action on the commemorative naming at the request of Dickinson County of the bridge on Route 631 Brush Creek Road over the Pound River at the intersection of Ramey Flats. Located within the Bristol District is the Herbert Charles Phipps Memorial Bridge. Mr. Gregg.
Mr. Secretary, this is in the Bristol District. Dickinson County Board of Supervisors enacted a resolution on July the 23rd, 2024 to honor the life and service and ultimate sacrifice of Staff Sergeant Herbert Charles Phillips to his country and his community. According to the resolution, Staff Sergeant Phillips was born in February 1938 in Dickinson County, grew up in the county in the Bush Creek area, and graduated from Clintwood High School in 1956. He was a member of the 82nd Airborne Infantry Division, home-based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and served as Staff Sergeant in the 101 Airborne Battalion, 327th Infantry, a company in Vietnam. On April the 22nd, 1962, while maneuvers in Ralsburg, West Virginia, Staff Sergeant Phillips unhesitantly jumped into the icy waters of the treacherous Cheat River to reach a girl who was clinging to a canoe that had capsized on the far side of the swollen river. Fighting the swift current in cold waters, he reached the girl. Sergeant Phillips' heroic action is in the highest tradition of the United States Army and reflects great credit upon himself and his military service. On September the 20th, 1966, in Vietnam, Staff Sergeant Herbert Charles Phillips' platoon was on a reconnaissance mission when it came under intense enemy fire from the rear. Sergeant Phillips, leader of the rear element, maneuvered his squad toward the enemy position to neutralize it. In doing so, he was fatally wounded as he reached the objective. His squad, inspired by Sergeant Phillips' aggressively and determined leadership, continued the assault and completely routed the enemy, enabling the platoon to proceed and successfully accomplish its initial mission. Sergeant Phillips was posthumously awarded medals for bravery, dedication, and valor in action, receiving the Silver Star, the Soldier's Medal, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. VDOT has had no public comment on this issue and recommend your approval.
Mr. Secretary, I move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Folks. Do we have a second? So, Mr. Sergeant Phipps, Herbert Charles Phipps Memorial Bridge. We have a motion. We have a second. Please join with me in rising to signify your affirmative vote. Thank you. You know, we all know this, but it's people like this that we've just recognized that allow us to live in this country, and we should never forget. Man,
Morning, sir. Good
how
morning,
are you
members of the board.
today?
Doing well, thank you.
We have item number 3, action on limited access control change for the realignment of Route 1750/522, Millwood Avenue for additional lanes and intersection improvements in the city of Winchester, located within the Stanton District. And there are some folks that will remember Millwood. Mr. Kasperowitz was here from Millwood. That was a different little piece of Millwood.
Traveled through there recently, Mr.
Yeah,
Secretary.
we probably had our largest public input session ever when we were talking about Millwood Road up there.
Very motivated community.
It was a very motivated community. It was a very interesting situation. That we all worked our way through it. Mr. Mann.
Let's see if we can help them out.
Yes, sir.
As you stated, I bring before you a limited access control change request in the city of Winchester in Stanton District. The request involves some minor limited access control changes associated with the project on Millwood Avenue, which is also Route 1750/522, right near Shenandoah University and Apple Blossom Mall. The project includes an additional left turn lane onto Apple Blossom Drive, an additional eastbound lane from Apple Blossom Drive to I-81 southbound, and realignment and intersection improvements at Mall Boulevard. The project has completed the required public involvement with no opposition, has completed the necessary environmental approvals, has been endorsed by the chief engineer, and has the support of the city of Winchester. The project does not require any additional FHWA approvals. I recommend your approval.
Is there any questions? Do we have a motion?
Mr. Secretary, I move for approval.
Good moves. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Lawson seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Mann. Item number 4, Ms. Pryor, action on the FY 25 to 36-year improvement program transfers for June 15, 2024 through August 16, 2024. Good morning, Ms. Pryor.
Morning.
Welcome. Nice to see you.
I have monthly transfers in your packet to present to you. I will acknowledge it's a unusually long list this month because we didn't meet last month. And also, as you recall, we amended about 30 state of good repair local paving projects in the Hampton Roads District, and those associated transfers are on this report for your approval this month. So I recommend your approval now. Thank you.
Anyone have any comments or questions? Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Kasperowitz moves, Dr. Smoot seconds. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Ms. Pryor, number 5, action on the 6-year improvement program in rail and public transportation allocations for fiscal years 25 through 30.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I have 3 proposed 6-year program amendments before you. One is a safety project, and the other 2 projects are funded with local funds and earmark funds, and I recommend your approval.
Questions? Do I have a motion to approve? Mr. Folk moves, Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much, Ms. Pryor. Item number 6, Mr. Trogdon. It's action on the 6-year improvement program transfers for the month of September 2024 for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation.
Thank you, sir. I'm here in the stead of our CFO who could not make it. So this is just a transfer over $200,000 that needs to come before the board to go to Blacksburg Transit from some de-obligated funds on a project. So any questions, happy to.
So since the CFO is not here and Mr. Trogdon is the acting director, I think we ought to ask about 26 questions about this. See how much
Send me
he
some
really,
notes. We'll
see
see
how
what-
much he really knows about it. That could be a little fun, Mr. Kasperitz. Are there any comments or questions on this? Do I have a motion to approve?
Secretary.
Thank you, Ms. Green motions and Dr. Smoot seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trogdon. Item number 7, Mr. Swanson. Good morning. Welcome. Action on Interstate 73 corridor and Henry County alternative location decision review.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. You have a resolution before you to rescind the CTB's location decisions associated with the Interstate 73 corridor, including the most recent Henry County alternative in the Salem district. The rationale to rescind the location decisions is based on the information reviewed during the July workshop earlier this year, which included the fact that there's currently no funding allocated or implemented or identified to implement the project. Therefore, VDOT staff recommends that the location decisions be rescinded.
Let me speak to this a little bit, particularly for the new members who weren't here for the July meeting. So, the Transportation Board denotes certain projects and locations, and we advertise what those are and publish those out of roads that have yet to be built. And so they're planning, it's a planning, basically a planning tool, a planning document. And historically, while we've done that, we've often left those plans without funding or any movement forward, but there's still a plan and it's still coming through your house or your yard or your business or something. And so you're sort of twisting in the wind out there. You know you've got a target on you. You just don't know if it's ever, the gun's going to ever get fired or the trigger's going to get pulled, if ever, or when. And so Mr. Kasperitz and others particularly, talked about that in previous years about how that is not a good situation. And so what we're trying to do as a board is to only have location decisions out there that might negatively impact somebody if they're real and if they're making progress, and if we expect them to happen. But to have something that sits out there for 20 years and it's got no money on it, it's just, it's harmful to the people that are in the way, and it's not necessary. And so we have a policy that the board adopted to review ones every so often, depending on their age, and to make them come back to us to see whether we want to still have that location decision or whether it's appropriate or not. So I think that's a really good process, a really good policy that Mr. Kasperitz and others, I was on the board 10 too, but he particularly staunch proponent of this. And so what we're trying to do is clean our stuff up. And if it's not real, if it's not going to happen in the near future, we don't see a funding path forward, then it comes back to us and we appropriately should remove that. And that's what this is about. And so are there any questions or comments on either this one or the policy in general, or what I've said? Mr. Kasperitz, you want to add anything?
No, thank you,
Yes, Ms. Dunlop.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to say, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Commissioner, I watched the July meeting, and this was very impressive to me. And I think it's a wonderful policy because it does allow private citizens to really kind of get on with their life and make plans for their own family and their own community. And it's terrific to see this kind of decision being made.
Ms. Dunlop, I've been a recipient of condemnation, potential condemnation from VDOT. And it was interesting because when it came to be, they brought out a plan that I'd never seen and know about, and it was really old. It was really old, like 30 years old or something. Now, I didn't know it was there, so I didn't really care at the time, but it was really old. I was like, wow, that's been sitting there on somebody's planning document for 30 years or more to come widen Route 33 and take all this land from me. And, you know, if I had something there or something, I mean, it's just, so my point is, I've been on the receiving end, and I totally understand why it's appropriate not to have those things out there, but for so long that aren't funded. So, good policy group. And with that, I think we have a decision to make here. So is there a motion? So moved. Mr. Kasperitz moves. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Swanson, item number 8. Item number 8. Thank you very much. Item number 8, action on the Martinsville Southern Connector / Route 220 location decision review.
Yes.
Mr. Swanson.
As you just stated, the next resolution is to modify the CTB's location decision from January 15th, 2020 for the Martinsville Southern Connector Route 220 to incorporate the modified alternative C as the preferred alternative to reflect what was in the final environmental impact statement as we workshopped in July. The current location decision is reflective of the draft EIS, so we are bringing our records up to date. But the rationale to modify the location decision is based on the information reviewed from the July workshop, which included the fact that there are continued efforts along this corridor of Route 20 to study and implement safety and operational improvements. Therefore, VDOT staff recommends that this location decision be modified.
Any questions? Do you have a motion to approve?
Secretary, please move approval.
Dr. Smoot moves and Mr. Kasperitz seconds. Ms. Green? We'll make you a third. She thirds. So, again, will tell you another good piece of work here. I'm actually going to be on this corridor on Thursday with some business leaders to sort of tour this whole corridor and sort of look at it, talk about what it can be and what it should be. So again, very focused on this part of the world, and I'll be here on Thursday with some substantial business types to see about the possibilities and where we need to go here. So really excited about that. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much. All right, Mr. Coker. How we doing?
I'm excellent, sir. I'm in Southwest Virginia. Couldn't be better.
Beautiful place to be, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is.
We're going to talk some bids today, Mr. Coker. How'd we do this month?
We did okay. We have one we'll probably need to talk about, but I have 4 bids in excess of $5 million that I'm presenting to the board for consideration. First up is Order H80 in the City of Richmond. This is UPC 15955. This is an intersection improvements project in the City of Richmond. We received 1 bid for just under $12.5 million from Caton Construction Group out of Charlottesville, Virginia. This does exceed the range, but I am recommending approval. So this project...
So you know what we're going to ask? We're going to ask, why is there, Ms. Dunlop, why is there only 1 bidder? Why are we recommending it when it exceeds the range? And help us work through that.
Sure. So this project is located in the City of Richmond. This is a highly congested intersection along a major thruway. It is Route 1 and Hopkins Road and Harwood Road, if you're familiar with that part of the city. There is a significant waterline relocation that was requested to be included in the project from the City of Richmond. The majority of the overage in this project is from that betterment. We do have environmental reports that indicate that there are contaminated soils in this area. So this is a highly complex, very involved project. We have advertised it twice previously. We had no bids in January. In March, we had 1 single bid from the same contractor for almost the exact same price, and then we received 1 bid this time. So and looking back at our records, there was minimal interest from other contractors when we had this project on advertisement.
Dunlop, do you have any questions? What are you thinking?
Well, I am curious as to why it would be important to proceed at this point in time under these circumstances.
This intersection right now is an offset intersection. So we are aligning it so that the two approach roads are more in alignment. We're increasing the signalization in the intersection. So this is a bit of a safety improvement. And then while we're there, the city has asked us to relocate a very large water main.
Made comment, Mr. Coker, about a substantial part of the overage.
Yes, sir.
Was because of the betterment.
Yes, sir.
And the overage, do you mean the overage to what we expected the range to be?
Yes, sir.
And was the betterment in the original range? Was the betterment scoped in the original?
Yes,
range?
we included the
So this-
betterment
it
in
was
our
all
estimated
scoped
cost.
in,
Yes, sir.
But what we're seeing is that the amount of money we put in for the betterment in our expected range was insufficient to that piece, that cost that came back for that betterment.
Yes, sir.
So that most of our overage is not associated with the rest of the road. Most of the overage is associated with relocating a water line. Thought should be able to be relocated more cheaply than it is.
Yes, sir. And yes, sir. And the city of Richmond has also increased their funding for this project to close the gap.
Secretary, that was going to be my comment as well. In my discussions with the residency, like everyone here, I was shocked to see that this came in at 12. I think the initial estimate was significantly lower than that. It's probably in our packet. But in my discussions, it was determined that City of Richmond and also the TPO were going to handle or cover that gap substantially between the initial estimate and where we landed today. So with that in mind, I got a lot more comfortable. But at first, I was shocked as well.
Well, and the difficult part to Ms. Dunlop's sort of earlier question or comment is we're in the city of Richmond. We're not in, pick Russell County. We're in the city of Richmond and we got one bid. Did it 3 times, Mr. Coker.
Sir.
Right. Now this is a different, unique sort of, it's not, it's got its own uniqueness to it, but one. So we are careful as we move forward, and if we, I will tell you that I believe our staff looks at this like it's their money, and that's how they operate, and that should give us comfort. But we need to continue to keep an eye on this and press on it, because one bidder doesn't really work so well. One of the great things we're doing on the gap, for example, is we've divided that into 3 separate projects. And the third section will be bid while the first 2 section has people on it of different companies working, and it's in the middle. So got 2 companies already there, one working on one end, one working on the other end, and you're gonna bid out the middle. That's a really nice position to be in. They're already mobilized, they're already there, their costs are gonna be cheaper, they're gonna want that work, so we should get good bidding. All right, you gotta make a decision if you're gonna go ahead or not, so. Davis is recommending approval, and as is staff, as is Mr. Coker, so. Further, excuse me?
So moved. Thank you.
Is there, well, we have a motion, do we have a second? Ms. Sellers seconds, is there a further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. With any abstentions? All right, Mr. Coker, let's move to order number K80.
Next project is K80. This is in the Richmond District. This is UPC 112042. This is a road improvements project in Hanover County. We received 5 bids. The low bidder was from J.L. Kent and Sons from Spotsylvania, Virginia for $8.3 million. This is within range, and I recommend approval.
Motion?
So moved.
Mr. Davis, is there a second? Ms. Green seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number L49. Mr. Coker.
Order L49 in the Northern Virginia District. This is UPC 121702. This is a bridge rehab project on 5 bridges on I-395 in Arlington County. We received 4 bids. The low bidder was Martin's Construction Corp. from Falls Church, Virginia for $5.5 million. This is within range, and I recommend award.
Motion to approve? So moved. Mr. Casperitz moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Coker, order number L50.
Order L50 in the Richmond and Fredericksburg districts. This is UPC 116726. This project is the installation of ITS devices along I-95. These are traffic cameras in various locations. We received 3 bids. The low bidder was Ardent Company out of McLean, Virginia for $6.6 million. This is within range. We recommend award.
Any questions? We have a motion to approve. Ms. Sellers moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Davis seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Well done, Mr. Coker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So that concludes our agenda for today, unless there's any new business. I'll just remind you, Carol, if you can remind us what the balance of the schedule looks like.
Yes. I have lunch that is currently waiting and available for you. That'll give you enough. Clothing, you can be on the tour bus this afternoon. The tour bus will leave at 12:45 down here from the circle, and we'll go on our schedule.
And we'll be back here by what time?
We should be back here around 4 o'clock.
Okay. So you got an hour and 3 minutes to get all ready to go, and we'll be downstairs. Are we out front or the conference room side?
Down here at the conference room, because we're gonna be on a bigger bus today, so there's not enough space up in front of the lobby, so we're gonna be down here. Fire alarm.
So go out to the same place we went to the fire alarm, and that's where we'll meet the bus at 12:45.
Don't want to miss that.
Thank you all very much. Meeting's adjourned.
That's right. All right.